Hey everyone, welcome to today's Explainer. We're looking at something today that honestly feels like it's pulled straight out of a sci-fi novel, but it is happening right now. India's recently launched green hydrogen train isn't just about a new way to get from point A to point B, it is a massive signal of where global infrastructure is heading. Let's get into it. So India just recently launched a green hydrogen train, marking a really bold shift in both transportation and energy. To put that into perspective, when you consider the sheer scale of the Indian railway network, it's one of the absolute largest in the world, introducing a train completely powered by green hydrogen is a monumental conceptual leap. We're talking about moving away from literally centuries of fossil fuel reliance and stepping into an era where heavy transport exhaust is quite literally just water vapor. This isn't merely a prototype, it's a huge statement of intent for the country's entire infrastructure moving forward. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. We have 4 key sections. First, the green hydrogen train. Second, geopolitics and energy security. Third, reducing the carbon footprint. And fourth, Net Zero Green Bharat. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the green hydrogen train and India's recent launch. To really appreciate this launch, we have to recognize why applying green hydrogen to heavy rail is such a massive breakthrough. We aren't talking about your everyday passenger car here. Rail networks require massive, sustained energy output. By using renewable energy to actually generate the hydrogen, it means this heavy transit can operate completely clean from the moment the fuel is created right through to combustion. Mastering the storage, the fuel cell efficiency, and the power delivery for a giant locomotive, that's an immense engineering hurdle, and overcoming it proves for sure that this clean fuel source is totally viable for industrial-scale heavy transport. But that brings up a really fascinating question. Why on earth is a single train so critical for geopolitics? On the surface, it's just one vehicle, right? But in reality, it's the tip of a massive strategic spear. Let's pivot from the specific physical train to the macro impact it carries for the nation's domestic leverage. Which leads us to Section 2, geopolitics and energy security, and the strategic shift this represents. Now, what's really interesting about this is right here in point 1, it bolsters India's geopolitical standing. You see, when a massive nation pioneers and implements cutting-edge, zero-emission transit entirely within its own borders, it shifts from being a follower to an absolute leader in the next industrial revolution. But point 2 is arguably even more crucial. It enhances domestic energy security. Historically, heavy transport has leaned hard on imported fossil fuels. By generating green hydrogen domestically, India is effectively creating its own energy. It completely insulates them from the wild volatility of global oil markets and external supply chain shocks. That is a massive geostrategic advantage. Moving on to Section 3, reducing the carbon footprint and the environmental impact. When you contrast traditional diesel transit with this new green hydrogen initiative, you are looking at a total paradigm shift. We aren't just talking about a slight dip in emissions here. Think about the vast logistics network moving freight and passengers across the country every single day. Swapping out that power source actively erases millions of tons of dense carbon from the atmosphere. It's a real game changer. It basically transforms the rail network from being one of the heaviest industrial polluters into the absolute cornerstone of a zero-emission economy. Okay, so we've seen the geopolitical benefits, and obviously the environmental necessity is clear, but high-level national goals like this require serious on-the-ground execution. So who is actually driving this technology domestically? That brings us to our final stop, Section 4, Net Zero Green Bharat, and their role as future innovators. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what Net Zero Green Bharat is doing. They are attacking this frontier with a really smart 2-step approach. Step 1 is their foundational work on green hydrogen, which directly contributes to the whole ecosystem required to power innovations like the new train. But Step 2 is where it gets incredibly compelling, developing carbon derivatives technology. This means they aren't just stopping at clean fuel. They are actively figuring out how to capture and repurpose carbon itself into useful industrial products. It's this brilliant dual focus, right? They're attacking the climate challenge from both ends, creating clean energy to replace fossil fuels and actually managing existing carbon emissions by turning them into industrial assets. Which leaves us with a pretty massive thought to ponder as we wrap up. What will carbon derivatives technology mean for the future of global transport? Think about it. If organizations like Net Zero Green Bharat can perfect not just zero-emission fuels like green hydrogen, but also nail the tech to utilize carbon derivatives, we could literally be looking at transport networks that actively help balance the environment. It is a completely thrilling prospect. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.